That was for scaring me. You made me think you were gonna stop being my friend.
Guys, I don't know what happened. I just got ravenous.
No.
Do you remember those teen stars who mysteriously disappeared without even saying goodbye? Back then, they lit up our screens, shaped our after-school routines, and felt like part of our own story. But somewhere along the way, they left, quietly. So why does it still feel so personal? What happened to Miranda? That was the question every kid had when the final season of Lizzie McGuire aired, and Lalaine was nowhere to be seen. You are watching a Disney Channel classic, you are watching Lizzie McGuire, and suddenly one of the trio is just gone. There was no big send-off, no farewell episode, not even a passing mention. Fans who grew up watching Lizzie, Gordo, and Miranda as the inseparable crew were just left to wonder. Lalaine was not just any character either. She was one of the few cool girls on television who felt real. She wore baggy pants, played guitar, and always said what was on her mind. Basically, she was the teen best friend everyone wished they had. But then she vanished, without saying goodbye. The official reason for her absence from the Lizzie McGuire movie and later episodes was a scheduling conflict. But let's be honest, nobody believed that. Years later, Lalaine herself would hint at deeper issues. The pressure of the spotlight, stereotypes, and being one of the very few Filipino-American actresses in a leading Disney role were all real. There were no interviews, no press releases, just a sudden absence that was never explained. For kids watching at home, it was like losing a best friend and never hearing from them again. That kind of quiet disappearance hits harder than most people realize. She did not just leave Lizzie McGuire, she stepped away from the industry entirely. During that time, she explored music, wrote songs, and kept a low profile. A few minor roles popped up here and there, but it never felt like a comeback. Interviews were rare, social media posts were sporadic, fans kept hoping for a reunion or even just a response to what happened, but nothing came. It was as if the same Miranda who walked out of our favorite middle school hallways had never existed in the first place. Now, when people rewatch the show, there is a strange emptiness. Lizzie and Gordo keep going, but the spark that Miranda added is just missing. Maybe that is why her disappearance hit so hard. Because it was not just about a character. It was about someone who meant something to millions of kids, vanishing at the height of her story arc. We never got closure, and that silence, even now, still echoes. Jake Lloyd's story is not just mysterious, it is tragic. You might remember him as the boy who played young Anakin Skywalker in Star Wars, The Phantom Menace. For a lot of kids in 1999, that was a dream come true. Star Wars was back. Lightsabers were cool again. And here was a child actor who became the face of one of the biggest movie franchises in history. But then he disappeared. And not just from film, from everything. It is easy to forget just how intense the backlash was to Phantom Menace. Critics were brutal. Star Wars fans were worse. And they did not just take their anger out on the plot or the pacing. They took it out on Jake. Imagine being only 10 years old and the entire internet is calling your performance annoying. That kind of attention breaks people. And Jake? He never recovered from it. He retired from acting just a few years later. Most of his early interviews show a kid who was clearly uncomfortable with fame. He said acting made his life a living hell. He was bullied in school. He was harassed in public. No child deserves that, especially not for doing what adults told him to do on set. Jake was not just a young actor. He was a kid who loved building things, drawing, and dreaming about space. Fame took those quiet joys away from him long before he had the words to understand why. We did not just criticize a performance, we dismantled a childhood. Years later, headlines returned, but for all the wrong reasons. Jake had been arrested, diagnosed with schizophrenia. His family released a public statement asking for privacy and explaining that he was receiving help. It was not just a case of a teen star walking away. It was a life unraveling under the weight of expectations no child should have carried. What hurts most is knowing how different this story could have been. If critics had been kinder, if fans had been more understanding. If the system had protected the kids, it made famous. Jake Lloyd disappeared without saying goodbye because there was never space for him to say anything at all. We were too busy tearing him down, and when he vanished, the silence just felt like another chapter in a story we helped ruin. There was a time in the 1990s when Jonathan Taylor Thomas was everywhere. Posters in every locker, magazines with his face on the cover. If you were growing up during that era, chances are you either had a crush on him or knew someone who did. He was the voice of young Simba in The Lion King. He was Randy Taylor on Home Improvement. He even starred in feel-good family movies that aired every weekend. But then, just like that, he disappeared. No scandal, no burnout. Just a quiet exit, like he had somewhere better to be. What made it so baffling was how smoothly everything was going. Jonathan was one of those rare child stars who seemed to get it right. He was articulate in interviews. He kept his private life private. And he always seemed just a little more thoughtful than the usual teen idol, which makes his exit all the more fascinating. He left Home Improvement before the final season, choosing instead to focus on school. Not acting school, college. He wanted to study philosophy and history. And he actually did. He went to Harvard, then Columbia. While most teen celebrities leaned into the fame machine, Jonathan Taylor Thomas pulled the emergency brake. He wanted something else, something quieter. Of course, rumors followed. Was he sick? Was he in trouble? But the truth seems simpler, and maybe more mature. He just wanted to live a normal life. He did a few guest spots on television over the years, but nothing major. Every time he reappeared, it felt more like a favor than a comeback. Fans never really got closure. There was no farewell interview, no final movie, just a slow fade out. And maybe that is what he wanted all along. Still, it left a hole. Because Jonathan Taylor Thomas was not just a teen idol, he was a part of growing up. And when he stepped away, it felt like someone had quietly turned out the lights on a whole chapter of youth. Aston Moore was unforgettable, but the world somehow forgot her anyway. You may remember her best as young Chrissy in Now and Then, a film that became something sacred for a whole generation of girls. That movie was everything. Summer nostalgia, growing pains, friendship, and feeling understood for the first time. Ashley stood out even in a cast full of future A-listers. Her comic timing was natural, her expressions effortless. She made awkwardness feel sweet and made every scene she was in feel warmer. But not long after the film's release, she simply disappeared. There were no major scandals, no splashy headlines, just silence. She did a few guest roles, a television movie here and there, and then gone. While her co-stars rose through the ranks of Hollywood, Ashley's name slipped out of the credits and out of memory, except for those who remembered and missed her. The truth came years later, in the worst possible way. In 2007, Aston Moore passed away at only 26 years old. The cause was an accidental drug overdose. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. The disappearance, the distance, the silence. Behind it all was a young woman who had struggled deeply after childhood fame faded. There is something especially haunting about child stars who leave no final message. It is not just about career. It is about how easily people can slip through the cracks when the cameras stop rolling. Ashley never got a second act. She never got to grow into a new version of herself on screen. And yet her performance in Now and Then still lives in people's hearts. Sometimes when you rewatch that film and you see her smile or crack a joke, there is a strange ache you feel in your chest, like you are watching someone frozen in time, someone who made an impact and then vanished. No goodbye, no send-off, just a quiet exit from a loud world. Dewey from Malcolm in the Middle was the quietest chaos in the house, and maybe the best part of the entire show. Erik Per Sullivan played him with a kind of genius that people often overlook in child actors. He was unpredictable, offbeat, somehow both the weirdest and the most lovable member of the family. But once the show ended, something odd happened. Erik did not just take a break. He disappeared entirely. No tabloid drama, no failed comebacks, no wild interviews, just silence. After one final voice role and a small indie film, he dropped out of Hollywood and never looked back. For years, fans searched. There were fake accounts, Reddit threads, even hoaxes. People genuinely wanted to know, where did Dewey go? Unlike other former child actors, Erik did not feed the nostalgia machine. He did not show up at reunions, did not post throwbacks. He just walked away from everything, which made it all the more mysterious. People speculated that maybe he wanted a normal life. Maybe he had just outgrown the spotlight. He had always been more reserved in interviews, more thoughtful. Maybe it all just became too much. What we do know is that he enrolled in college. He stayed close to his hometown. And he left the fame behind like it was never something he needed in the first place. Still, the absence feels loud. Malcolm in the Middle is one of those shows people return to again and again, and Dewey's disappearance is the one thing no one can quite wrap their heads around. When you watch it now, you find yourself focusing on his lines more closely. You look for signs, for clues. But maybe the answer is simple. Maybe Erik Per Sullivan just wanted to live his life without the noise. Even so, it is hard not to feel a little sad about it. Not because he owes anyone anything, but because we never got to say thank you or goodbye. Jaime Lynn Spears was supposed to be the next big name in teen television. Zoe 101 was a certified hit, and she was front and center, charismatic, confident, and completely in control. For kids growing up in the early 2000s, Jaime Lynn was it, the lead role, the blueprint. But just when her star was rising the fastest, everything stopped, and it stopped suddenly. At 16 years old, Jaime Lynn announced she was pregnant. The news shocked her fans and the industry. Nickelodeon pulled reruns, tabloids exploded, and just like that, she vanished from acting. No final episode, no season-long goodbye. She disappeared not just from Zoe 101, but from public life entirely. In the years that followed, Jaime Lynn stayed mostly out of the spotlight. She moved back home, raised her child. She shifted from being a teen icon to just being a teen mom. The contrast was huge. One minute she was Zoe Brooks, dorm life and beach adventures. The next, she was navigating early motherhood in real life. It took nearly a decade before she would appear again, briefly in country music and on television. But it was never quite the same. The momentum was gone. The world had moved on. And so had she. Still, for fans of Zoe 101, there was always this weird ache. The show did not get an ending. The story just stopped. And Jaime Lynn, who once felt so familiar to viewers, became almost unreachable. A person you once saw every afternoon after school, now a complete mystery. Even recent interviews and reunions have not fully answered the question of what really happened. And maybe they never will. Maybe that chapter of her life just closed. Quietly. Suddenly. There is something about teen fame that burns too hot, too fast. And for Jaime Lynn Spears, the end came not with a scandal, but with a life shift that changed everything. The lights faded, the screen went dark, and we never got a proper goodbye. For a while, Andrew Lawrence was just about everywhere. If you had a television in the late 1990s, there was no avoiding him. He starred alongside his real-life brothers, Joey and Matthew, in Brotherly Love, a show that somehow made sibling chaos feel charming. Andrew was the youngest, but often the funniest. He had the floppy hair, the sharp timing, and that kind of effortless presence you just could not teach. And then one day, it was over. He faded out of teen television without headlines, without drama, without a word. What made his story feel so strange was that he was part of a family built for the spotlight. The Lawrence brothers were a package deal. From Boy Meets World to Disney Channel movies, they were Hollywood's golden boys for a minute. And Andrew? He had serious momentum, guest spots, voice work, leading roles in teen films. You would think the next step was obvious. But instead of blowing up, he backed away. He still worked here and there, some voice roles, some indie stuff, but it was never in the public eye the way it had been. There were no red carpets, no major campaigns. The name Andrew Lawrence slowly stopped popping up in credits, and yet there was never a scandal. Never a big moment of fallout. He just moved on, started working behind the camera, focused on music, stayed close to his brothers, but kept a smaller circle. For fans who remembered him as a mainstay of the late 90s Disney lineup, the silence was jarring. You would scroll through reruns and wonder, wait, what happened to him? And there was no real answer. That is the thing about fame when you are young. Sometimes it does not come crashing down, it just slips quietly out the door. And with Andrew Lawrence, it felt like one moment he was everywhere, and the next, he was someone you only remembered in flashes. No goodbye, no finale, just gone. Alex D. Linz had one of those faces that defined an era. If you were a kid in the early 2000s, you knew him, even if you did not know his name. He was the kid in Max Keeble's Big Move. He was in Home Alone 3. He was always playing the underdog, the clever kid, the one who would outsmart every adult in the room. His energy was infectious, his timing always sharp, and then, just like that, he was gone. There was no grand exit, no dramatic role that wrapped it all up. He simply stopped appearing in films, and for a child actor who had been everywhere, it was confusing. No one really expected Alex D. Linz to just vanish. As it turns out, acting had never been his long-term goal. After a few more television roles in his early teens, he quietly walked away from Hollywood. He chose school, studied hard, pursued a completely different life, and he never looked back. There was something refreshing about how low-key it was. No social media goodbye, no "Where Are They Now" tour. He just exited stage left and let the spotlight land on someone else. But for fans, especially those who watched his movies on repeat, it was bittersweet. He had been part of so many Saturday afternoons, so many sleepovers, so many moments where the only thing that mattered was whether the kid on screen would win in the end. And then, suddenly, that kid was gone. Rewatching Max Keeble's Big Move now feels strange. It is still funny, still smart. But there is a ghost of something there, a sense that we never really got to see what Alex D. Linz might have become. Or maybe we did. Maybe he knew exactly when to leave. And maybe that kind of quiet exit is its own kind of happy ending. No noise, no burnout, just a clean break from a loud business. Mischa Barton's face was once impossible to miss. The OC turned her into a household name almost overnight. As Marissa Cooper, she was the show's emotional core, a mess of contradictions, heartache, beauty, and self-destruction. And that role made her famous. Overnight, she was everywhere. Magazine covers, paparazzi shots, red carpets. But when her character was killed off in season 3, something shifted, and fast. Her departure from the show was dramatic, both on-screen and behind the scenes. Marissa's death was shocking, but what followed was even more so. Mischa did not pivot to blockbuster films or major TV dramas. Instead, she kind of just disappeared from A-list attention. There were rumors, creative differences, burnout, even whispers of behind-the-scenes drama. Whatever the reason, she vanished from the kind of spotlight she once owned, and in its place, a lot of tabloid noise. Mischa became more known for what happened after fame than during it. She was photographed more for what she wore at gas stations than any new role. She tried a few comebacks, reality TV, indie films, smaller parts, but nothing ever stuck the way the OC had. It is easy to forget just how young she was when everything hit. Mischa was barely out of her teens, and she was dealing with fame levels that would have broken anyone. Now, when people look back on the OC, her absence is what stands out most. Everyone else got some version of a second act. But Mischa? She left the main stage and never really came back. There is something especially haunting about that, because for so many fans, she was the show. And when she vanished, it felt like the whole world of the OC cracked. Sometimes disappearing is not about failure, it is about escape. And maybe Mischa Barton knew she had to step away before the industry consumed her entirely. Dana Plato had one of the most recognizable faces on television in the 1980s. As Kimberly Drummond on Different Strokes, she was the sweet, smart big sister, America's teenager. She was part of the perfect sitcom formula, the kind of show that glued families to the couch. And for a while, Dana lived in that spotlight like she was born for it. But behind the scenes, things were unraveling fast. The industry was not kind to young women. And for Dana, it became a trap she never really escaped. Her fall from fame was not sudden, but it was steep. After leaving the show, she struggled to find serious roles. Hollywood was quick to typecast her, then quicker to forget her. She turned to B-movies, then modeling, then nothing at all. Financial issues hit hard. Addiction followed. And by the time tabloids picked up her story again, it was already in the context of a "Where did it all go wrong?" headline. Dana tried to fight her way back. She appeared on talk shows, shared her story. She talked about being used up and thrown away by an industry that only valued her as long as she smiled. And while some people saw her vulnerability, most just mocked it. Her final years were heartbreaking. She was living in a trailer, struggling with drugs, hoping somehow that she could still make it back. But in 1999, Dana Plato died of an overdose. It was ruled suicide. She was only 34. The saddest part? Her death barely made headlines, just a short story about a former star gone too soon. But for fans who had watched her grow up on screen, it felt like a loss twice over, once when she vanished from fame, and again when she left the world entirely. Dana Plato never got her redemption arc. No big comeback, no glowing tribute. Just a legacy shaped by a system that built her up and let her fall. And in the silence she left behind, all we have is a reminder of how fame can shine so brightly it burns. Taran Noah Smith was the youngest of the Taylor boys on Home Improvement. He was the wide-eyed, goofy one, always asking weird questions, always getting in trouble, but in the best possible way. He was not just a background character, he had a presence, a kind of innocent honesty that made him feel like everyone's little brother. But once the series wrapped, Taran vanished. Not a pause, not a break, a full stop. What made his disappearance stand out was how intentional it seemed. He was just 16 when Home Improvement ended, and he made it very clear he was done. He wanted nothing to do with Hollywood, no spin-offs, no sequels. He did not even want to act again. Instead, Taran went in a completely different direction. He started a vegan food business, bought a house, tried to live quietly. But the press kept coming. People were obsessed with his choices. He had gotten married to someone 16 years older than him. He was investing in offbeat business ideas. And all the while, he was still just a teenager trying to figure it all out. There were legal battles with his parents over money he earned as a child actor. There were stories about him rejecting the Hollywood lifestyle. But Taran kept doing things his way, even when it did not make sense to the people watching from the outside. Today, he lives almost entirely off the grid. Occasionally, he pops up in an interview or news piece. But he is not chasing the spotlight. He is not nostalgic about the show. He does not miss the fame. And maybe that is what makes his story so rare. He walked away before the machine could chew him up. Before the headlines, before the downfall, he disappeared while things were still good, on his terms. When you rewatch Home Improvement, it is hard not to smile when you see him. That kid, so full of life and timing. And then you wonder what it must feel like to have had that much attention, and to choose a life where no one knows your name. For a few years in the late 1990s, Rachael Leigh Cook was everywhere. She's all that made her the face of teen romance, the poster child for the unnoticed girl becomes the star story. And she nailed it. That performance became iconic. People quoted it, parodied it, fell in love with it. And then she just drifted out of the spotlight. Unlike some stars, Rachael Leigh Cook did not crash. She just coasted. She kept working, yes, but the roles got quieter, smaller, less central. She went from red carpets and press tours to voice work and cable movies. And through it all, fans kept wondering, why did she disappear? There was no scandal, no public meltdown. Rachael always came across as grounded, almost too normal for the chaos of late 90s Hollywood. Maybe that is why she never played the fame game the way others did. She did not date for headlines. She did not chase big franchises. She just did the work. Until the work changed. She has spoken in interviews about how she felt boxed in by her early success, how people could not see her as anything but Laney Boggs, and how hard it is to be taken seriously when your most famous scene involves a slow-motion staircase and a makeover. In recent years, she has made something of a quiet return. Hallmark movies, indie projects, even producing. But it is clear she is doing it on her own terms now. Still, when people think of her, they think of that one perfect moment in a teen movie that defined a decade. And maybe that is part of why her disappearance felt so strange. She was so big, so fast, and then she was gone. There is something melancholy about it. A sense that she had more to give, more stories to tell. But Hollywood moved on, and so did she. When the final song plays at the end of She's All That, you can almost feel the closing of a chapter, not just in the movie, but in Rachael Leigh Cook's career. No loud goodbye, no closing credits for real life, just a slow fade to quiet. Vanessa Lee Chester had one of those rare careers that burned bright, just not for long. She was not just a child actor, she was the child actor in some of the biggest movies of the 1990s. A little princess made audiences fall in love with her warmth and intelligence. Harriet the Spy put her alongside other rising stars. And then came Jurassic Park, The Lost World, where she played the daughter of Jeff Goldblum's character right in the middle of a blockbuster dinosaur universe. For a few years, it felt like Vanessa Lee Chester was on the path to becoming a permanent fixture in Hollywood. But just when everything should have taken off, she quietly stepped away. There was no controversy, no media circus. She simply stopped appearing in high-profile roles. And that silence, after the buzz and the magazine interviews and the red carpets, was deafening. People noticed. Not immediately, but over time. She had this strong presence on screen, that blend of curiosity and confidence you do not see often. And suddenly, it was gone. What makes Vanessa's story different is how early it all happened. She was still so young when the credits started slowing down. She had worked with major directors, held her own next to stars. And then she slipped out of sight. She still pops up here and there, a short film, a guest appearance, an Instagram post that goes viral for a second, but it never feels like a return. It feels like someone who once belonged to that world, now living in another one entirely. And while she has never spoken much about why she left, you can kind of guess. Hollywood has never been easy for young black actresses. Roles dry up, opportunities narrow, and after the age of 12, the spotlight starts looking for someone else. But Vanessa Lee Chester left a mark. Watch her scenes in A Little Princess again, and you will see it. That spark, that depth. She had range. She had presence. She could have gone anywhere. And maybe she chose to go where cameras were not. Still, for fans, her absence feels personal, like a favorite character walking out of a story mid-chapter. No explanation, no curtain call, just a girl who was once everywhere and then wasn't. If you grew up in the 1990s, Courtland Mead was impossible to miss. He had a look, a voice, a style that made him stand out even in the most chaotic kid movies. You saw him in The Little Rascals with that bowl cut and gap-toothed grin. He played Danny Torrance in the 1997 miniseries of The Shining. He was even the weird kid with the beanie in The Faculty. Courtland was everywhere. Cartoons, live action, Disney Channel appearances. But then something happened. Or maybe nothing happened. He just stopped. There was no dramatic news story, no scandal to point to. Just a slow fade from the screen. 1 minute he was booking major roles, and the next, he was gone. And for a lot of fans, the realization came years too late. He had been part of so many movies that shaped childhoods, but because he was always cast as the quirky one, he never got the big lead, never got the major breakout moment. He was the scene stealer, not the headline, and maybe that is why his disappearance went so unnoticed. Courtland's last major credits came in the early 2000s. A voice here, a cameo there, and then silence. No official goodbye, no press statement. In later interviews, he spoke about feeling disillusioned with the industry, about how hard it was to find meaningful roles as he grew older, how being a child star sometimes feels like an expiration date you never agreed to. There is something bittersweet about watching him now, in old reruns, because you can see the charm, you can see the talent. He was funny in a way that felt unforced, natural. But like so many others, he got older, and Hollywood looked away. No controversy, no bad behavior, just a system that moves on faster than it should. And in a way, his exit feels like the story of dozens of child actors who gave us everything in our youth and then had nowhere to go next. Courtland Mead may not have had the loudest career, but he had one that mattered, and his sudden disappearance, quiet, complete, feels like the kind of loss you only notice when the movie ends and the room gets too quiet. Before Lizzie McGuire ever aired, Disney had Flash Forward, and at the heart of it was Jewel Staite, sharp, funny, effortlessly real. She played Becca Fisher, a smart teen navigating school, crushes, and growing up, all with the kind of sincerity that made you feel like you actually knew her. She was not over the top or trying to be cool, she just was. And for preteens in the mid to late 1990s, Jewel Staite was a big deal. But while she kept working, her path into stardom took an unexpected turn. Unlike other Disney stars, she never exploded into the mainstream. She moved on to shows like Firefly, which became a cult classic but never gave her the fame push she deserved. She was clearly talented. Directors loved working with her. But somehow, she never got that one breakout role that could hold her in the spotlight. Jewel continued acting, more than most on this list actually, but in quieter spaces. Canadian television, guest roles, a few science fiction projects. It was work, good work, but not headline work. Not the kind that lands you on magazine covers or late-night interviews. Fans noticed. People remembered her from Flash Forward and wondered, wait, why is she not everywhere right now? She had the look, the timing, the heart. But in the industry, timing is everything, and hers just never quite matched the mainstream moment. In later interviews, Jewel opened up about this, about choosing to stay grounded, about avoiding the Hollywood machine. She wanted to act, but not at the cost of her peace. And maybe that is the real reason she never chased the fame harder. She never vanished, not exactly. But she also never demanded the stage. She just kept going steadily in a business that often chews people up by the time they are 20. Looking back now, her early roles feel like a kind of soft comfort, characters who were kind, complex, and never tried too hard. Jewel Staite did not disappear as much as she faded into something quieter. A different kind of success, one that is not measured in awards or gossip columns, but in longevity. Still, for those of us who grew up with her, it is hard not to feel a little nostalgic. Because when someone meant that much to your younger self, you always wish they had gotten a louder goodbye. There's a good chance you do not remember his name, but you definitely remember his face. Wide glasses, fur-lined coat, and that desperate, pleading line, "You'll shoot your eye out." Peter Billingsley was Ralphie, the Ralphie. And A Christmas Story was not just a movie, it was a ritual. It was Christmas morning in a snow-drenched living room with a plate of cookies and that one kid who just wanted a Red Ryder BB gun more than life itself. The strange thing is that one film should have made him a household name forever. And in some ways, it did. You see his face on t-shirts, ornaments, memes, even wrapping paper. But the person? The actor behind the glasses? He vanished. Quietly. Cleanly. Like snow melting the day after Christmas. Peter did a few more acting gigs after that, guest spots on television, a few commercials, but it was never the same. The problem with being part of a classic is that you stop being you. You become the character. And Ralphie, lovable as he was, cast a long shadow. So Peter pivoted. Instead of chasing the spotlight, he stepped behind it. He got into production. Worked closely with Jon Favreau. Had a hand in films like Iron Man and Elf. In fact, that dry, deadpan tone in Elf? That is him. He even directed a couple of projects, quietly built a whole second act in Hollywood without ever needing to put the glasses back on. But fans never really caught up with that. To most of the world, he stayed frozen in that one Christmas, one role, one moment. And that is what makes his story so unique. He did not fall. He did not fail. He just changed. Quietly. Purposefully. While the rest of us kept watching A Christmas Story every December, he moved on. You have to wonder how that feels, to be everyone's childhood memory, but no one's current conversation. Peter Billingsley never really left Hollywood, but for the people who grew up with him, it feels like he disappeared. The secret world of Alex Mack felt like someone handed you a diary filled with electric secrets and said, "This is what growing up really feels like." Not just the awkward parts or the funny bits, but the transformation, the fear, the pressure to hide who you are just to survive middle school. Alex Mack was just a normal girl until one accident gave her superpowers: telekinesis, shape-shifting, even turning into a silver puddle. But here's the thing. It was never really about the powers. It was about what you do when you are different and scared and trying to stay invisible. It was about lying to your best friend because the truth might ruin everything. About hiding from the people who say they want to help but only want to control you. About looking in the mirror and not knowing what version of yourself is going to show up that day. It captured all the weirdness of adolescence and wrapped it in science fiction that felt just close enough to possible. The show had a grit to it. Not dark, but raw. It did not sugarcoat the fear of getting caught or the anxiety of not being normal. And yet, it still found space for humor, for friendship, for those little wins that make being a teenager bearable. Alex was smart, brave, messy, and real. Her world was complicated. Her choices were heavy. And you watched because somewhere deep down, you wondered what secrets might be hiding in your own world too. What if something in you was strange, or powerful, or both? The secret world of Alex Mack was not a fantasy. It was a mirror. And sometimes it showed us more than we were ready to see. Mandy Hampton was a sharp, ambitious political consultant introduced in Season 1 of The West Wing. She had presence. She had tension with Josh. She had promise. Then Season 2 arrived and Mandy was gone. Just gone. No farewell, no resignation, no tragic exit. Her name was never mentioned again. The show simply moved forward, as if she had never occupied the West Wing's halls. Viewers were left confused, scanning episodes for clues, wondering if they had missed something. But there was nothing to find. It was not a plot hole. It was a decision. She had been a central figure in strategy meetings, conflict arcs, and staff relationships, and yet her desk vanished like it had never been there. The very tone of the show shifted, sealing off the part of its world where she used to exist. Her disappearance created a vacuum, not just in the office, but in the show's moral complexity. For a series that prided itself on transparency and consequence, Mandy's Erasure felt like a cover-up. A show that preached the power of process refused to process her exit. In a world where every character's arc had meaning, Mandy was reduced to an error. And in doing so, the show broke its own rules of narrative justice. Creator Aaron Sorkin later said the character just did not work, but the lack of resolution turned Mandy into one of television's strangest ghost stories. In a show filled with gravitas, consequences, and emotional depth, her disappearance left a quiet wound. What kind of message does that send when even the sharpest women in politics can be erased without a word? Jeff Cohen gave us one of the most unforgettable performances in 80s cinema, and he did it with a belly, a scream, and a dance. As Chunk in the Goonies, he was the heart of a generation's favorite misfit crew. He was not cool, not slick, not heroic in the classic sense, but he was real, and that made him unforgettable. The Truffle Shuffle became legend, and so did Jeff. But then, nothing. After the Goonies, Jeff Cohen quietly left the screen behind. No chase for bigger roles, no desperate clinging to fame. Instead, he did something few expected. He reinvented himself. While Hollywood was busy trying to fit him into boxes he had already outgrown, Jeff walked away and studied law. He became an entertainment lawyer, not a punchline, not a sidekick, a force. Today, he is behind the scenes, navigating contracts instead of scripts, protecting artists instead of performing as one. And the irony is beautiful. The kid who once had to shout to be heard now helps others speak for themselves. He is powerful, respected, and deeply grounded in the very industry that once tried to define him. His story is not just about transformation. It is about reclaiming identity, about proving that child actors are not frozen in time. They grow, they evolve, and sometimes the most heroic thing you can do is trade the spotlight for something quieter, but just as impactful. Jeff Cohen did not just disappear. He became something more. You cannot say The Love Boat without thinking of that theme song, and if you stuck around for the opening credits, you always saw her. Jill Whelan playing Vicky Stubing, the captain's daughter. She came on board as a kid, but stuck around for nearly a decade, growing up on screen as millions of families tuned in every week. She had the hair, the dimples, the sweet nature. Vicky was the heart of the show in a lot of ways, the innocence in the midst of all that romantic chaos. And then, when the ship docked for good, Jill Whelan went quiet. She was not the type to chase paparazzi or stir up trouble, but that almost made her easier to forget. You would see her now and then, maybe a cruise line commercial, maybe a reunion episode, but for the most part she was gone from the public eye. What most people do not know is that Jill stayed closer to the ocean than to Hollywood. She worked with Princess Cruises as an ambassador, did a bit of radio, lived a regular life, or as regular as it gets after being in one of the most iconic television series of its era. She did face some rough patches, divorce, career shifts, trying to find work that felt meaningful while the rest of the world remembered her as a kid in sailor stripes. And that is the tough part. Once people lock in an image of you as a child, it is hard to reintroduce yourself as anything else. Jill never had that one big thing after The Love Boat. No blockbuster, no prestige television moment. She just lived her life, raised her family, took gigs here and there, and for fans who saw her as this constant, comforting presence every Saturday night, that quiet fade felt almost eerie. Because when you grow up on a television set surrounded by scripts and applause, disappearing does not look like falling. It looks like real life. Bills, kids, peace, and maybe even happiness. Still, you cannot help but wonder what might have been. Jill Whelan did not crash. She did not spiral. She just drifted out to sea, and the cameras never followed. Salute Your Shorts was summer chaos in a canteen, and it never pretended to be anything else. It was loud, it was messy, it was full of farts, fights, pranks, and perfectly awkward teenage energy. Camp Anawana was not a place where you became a better person. It was where you survived the weirdest summer of your life, and maybe came out a little stronger for it. This show was Nickelodeon in its rawest form. Zero polish, all heart. Every episode felt like it had been made in the dirt, in the heat, under the screech of a bug zapper, and that was the point. The kids were not actors. They were walking disasters with just enough charm to keep you watching. You had the bully, the nerd, the weirdo, the jock, but it never felt fake. They were too wild to be scripted, too alive to be boring. You watched because it felt real. Not real like documentary, real like, I remember what it was like to be 13 and not know what the hell was going on. There were food fights, broken bunk beds, stolen underwear on flagpoles, and in the middle of all that, tiny moments of heart. Someone standing up for the little guy. Someone realizing they actually missed home. Someone writing a dumb song that accidentally made everyone cry. Salute Your Shorts was a love letter to the summer you swore you hated but secretly treasure to this day. It was uncomfortable. It was inappropriate. It was exactly what being a kid felt like. Seven was the Bundys' unexpected adopted son in season 7 of Married with Children. He came out of nowhere, literally dropped off by relatives, and was folded into the family like a sitcom experiment. Blonde, wide-eyed, and a little clueless, Seven was supposed to be a fresh spark, but audiences never warmed up to him. And just as suddenly as he arrived, he disappeared. Poof, no goodbye, no send-off, no teary farewell. It became a running joke on the show. His face even showed up on a milk carton in one episode, mocking his own exit. But the humor could not hide the awkward truth. Seven was a mistake. A character added under pressure, then deleted under silence. There was no emotional arc, no integration, no real effort to make him fit. His character floated like a ghost over every episode he was in. And when he vanished, it was like the show was trying to laugh off a panic attack. Behind the laughter was a silent admission. Some experiments are too awkward to own. Still, he represented something bigger. He showed us how even chaotic shows like Married with Children were not immune to executive meddling and mid-season desperation. And his vanishing reminds us that sometimes even fictional families reject what they are told to embrace. What does it say when a kid is dropped off, forgotten, and barely even missed? Danny Lloyd gave one of the most iconic performances in horror history, before he even knew what horror was. As little Danny Torrance in The Shining, he whispered red rum into our nightmares and stared blankly into a future he could not escape. But off-camera, Danny Lloyd was not haunted. He was just a child with a quiet voice and a curious mind. And when the cameras stopped rolling, he did not chase the fame. He simply went home. He was only 6 years old when Stanley Kubrick cast him. Kubrick famously shielded him from the darker parts of the film, never letting him realize just how terrifying his role was. That protection became prophetic. Because after one more acting job, Danny Lloyd left Hollywood entirely. No talk shows, no press tours, no desperate clinging to a child role, just a vanishing act that felt almost supernatural. He became a biology professor, a husband, a father. He spent decades away from the limelight, content to live in a world where no one recognized his face, only his kindness. When he finally gave an interview years later, it was not to reclaim fame, but to reflect on how grateful he was for a normal life, one where he could grow up, finish school, and become someone beyond the boy who rode a tricycle through a haunted hotel. It is easy to forget that behind every iconic child role is a real child. And sometimes, the best twist in a horror story is that the kid made it out, safe, happy, whole. Danny Lloyd disappeared, but not because he was lost, because he was found. If your family had a favorite sitcom in the 80s, chances are Growing Pains was right up there. And right in the middle of it all was Jeremy Miller, smiling, goofy, always ready with a comeback Ben Seaver. He was the little brother everyone either had or wished they did. A classic sitcom kid with the perfect balance of mischief and warmth. You saw him every week, and for a while it felt like he would always be there. But after the show ended, Jeremy kind of faded out. Not all at once. More like a slow dimming of the light. He made a few appearances here and there, some TV movies, a reunion special, but that spark from Growing Pains? It did not carry over. And while the other stars from the show found ways to stay in the public eye, Jeremy quietly stepped back. Behind the scenes, though, things were rough. Jeremy later revealed that he had struggled with alcohol abuse starting as young as 14. 14. It is one of those truths that hits hard, especially when you remember how many kids looked up to him. While fans were laughing along with reruns, he was fighting a battle no one saw. It took years before he opened up about it, and when he did, it was not just brave, it was heartbreaking. Jeremy eventually got help and later became a spokesperson for a recovery program. He was trying to make a comeback, trying to channel the pain into something good. But Hollywood did not really come calling the same way. He never had a scandal that lit up headlines. He never did anything outrageous or dramatic. He just slipped away, like a lot of child stars do, quietly, without a trace. And when you rewatch those old episodes now, there is a tinge of something else behind the laughs. That feeling of looking at a frozen moment in time, knowing what came after, but unable to change it. Jeremy Miller was more than just a laugh track and a sweater vest. He was a real kid in a very unreal world, and when that world moved on, it barely looked back. Quinn Cummings was never the kind of child star who felt like a product. She was sharp, sincere, self-aware in a way that made her Oscar-nominated performance in The Goodbye Girl feel like more than just acting. It felt like truth. She was the clever kid who said what the adults were too afraid to, but even at her brightest, Quinn was already seeing through the glitter. She left acting before the industry could wear her down, before the roles dried up, before she became someone she did not recognize. Instead, she did something rare. She left on her own terms. Quinn became a writer, an entrepreneur, a commentator. Her essays cut like glass, funny, brutally honest, always thoughtful. She spoke openly about the absurdities of fame, parenting, and growing up in a world obsessed with image. Her exit was not a mystery. It was a declaration that her identity was not tied to box office numbers or red carpets, that she could be more. And she was. She built a second career from intellect and integrity, not nostalgia. In a culture that often devours its young, Quinn Cummings walked away with her voice intact. And maybe that is the most powerful kind of disappearance, the one that becomes a transformation. She is not gone. She is just somewhere better, somewhere real. Dr. Grace Miller arrived in Season 8 of ER like a breath of cold air. Tough, capable, and direct. Played by British actress Mary McCormick, she challenged the way County General operated. She was not there to make friends, she was there to do her job. But just as quickly as she arrived, she was gone. No transfer, no accident, no farewell. One week she was arguing over patient care, and the next, the hospital halls just moved on without her. No one asked where she went. No one remembered she had been there. There was no empty desk, no lingering look down the hallway, no handoff of her patients. Her name was not whispered in passing, nor was her absence used to reflect on hospital burnout or staff turnover. She was written out as if she had never mattered. But to viewers who noticed, her silence became a crack in the ER's realism. In a show built on life and death urgency, that silence hit differently. It felt like a glitch. Behind the scenes, it was likely just a short-term casting decision, but on screen it left a gap in the rhythm of the ER. Dr. Miller could have grown into something bigger, an outsider who slowly found her place. Instead, she became just another unsolved case. What does it say about a hospital drama when the people saving lives can vanish without anyone blinking? Gullah Island was not just a kids' show. It was a window into joy that was loud, colorful, and full of music you still remember the words to, even now. Before you understood what culture meant, this show showed you. It showed you what community felt like, what love looked like when it danced and sang and wore bright colors without ever apologizing. Gullah Island was built around a real culture, Gullah Geechee, the descendants of West African people brought to the coastal South. That culture was always there. It was in the way the characters spoke, in the rhythm of the songs, in the way the family cared for each other. But you did not need a history book to understand it. You felt it. You saw it in how the characters laughed, helped, taught, and celebrated together. There was a frog named Binya Binya, who might have been the most joyful puppet to ever hop across your screen. There were sing-alongs you can probably hum right now without even trying. And there was always a lesson, but it never felt like a lecture. It felt like play, like freedom, like someone gave your imagination a place to run barefoot outside. Looking back, it is wild that a show this beautiful, this rooted in real culture, ever faded from memory. It should be studied. It should be celebrated. But instead, it sits buried in the back corners of streaming nostalgia. Gullah Island taught you what it meant to live in harmony, with people, with family, with the land, and with your own voice. And now that you are older, you realize how rare that is, how precious, how needed. How many kids shows today even try to do that? Brian Bonsall had one of those faces that was hard to forget. Wide eyes, slightly unsure smile, like a kid who knew he was walking into something way bigger than himself. He joined Family Ties during the later seasons as Andy Keaton, the youngest member of the family. By then, the show was already a hit. But Brian added this fresh, adorable energy that made the aging series feel new again. He was just a little guy, but man, he had presence. And then he was everywhere. Guest roles, television movies, even a part in Star Trek: The Next Generation. For a minute there, it looked like Brian Bonsall was going to be one of the rare child actors who kept going. The kind who grows into bigger roles, better scripts, and an adulthood in the spotlight. But that path took a hard turn. By the early 2000s, Brian had quit acting altogether. And the headlines that followed? They were not the kind you clip for a scrapbook. They were court dates, arrests, stories about substance abuse, violence, and a string of charges that painted a picture few fans were ready to see. The cute kid from Family Ties had grown up, but not in the way anyone expected. Still, buried under the mistakes was a story worth hearing. Brian later opened up about those years, saying that fame had hit too early, and life after it just unraveled. He started playing in punk rock bands. The Hollywood Polish was gone, replaced with gritty bars, tattoos, and music that screamed instead of smiled. And yet, through all that, there is this strange resilience to him, like someone trying to find something real after living in make-believe for too long. He is clean now, still making music, still figuring things out. You think back to those final seasons of Family Ties, and you can almost feel the weight of it, the pressure of being the kid who has to keep the show going. The audience never sees the real life ticking underneath that laugh track. Brian Bonsall did not vanish because he was forgettable. He vanished because fame was not built for kids like him. And what hurts is not just that he disappeared, but that when he reappeared, the world barely noticed. The Busy World of Richard Scarry was one of those rare shows that made everyday life feel like an adventure. Not because it was flashy, but because it paid attention. Everything moved fast, but nothing felt rushed. The streets of Busy Town were filled with animals dressed like people, working jobs, making mistakes, saying sorry, and trying again. As a kid, that mattered more than you realized. You watched Hucklecat and Lowly Worm do everything from baking bread to learning how the post office worked. And it felt exciting, important. Like even the tiniest job had a story behind it. That was the genius of Richard Scarry. It turned the ordinary into something worth noticing. You were not just learning about the world, you were learning how to see it. To notice the mail truck, the grocery store clerk, the guy fixing the manhole. It told you that everyone mattered, even if they were just delivering apples. The animation was soft and playful, full of colors that felt like warm mornings in kindergarten. The music was cheerful but never annoying, and the characters made you feel like Busy Town could be your town, just one step to the left behind your backyard fence. It was educational, sure, but never preachy. It explained the world without making it feel boring. And more than anything, it gave you the feeling that growing up might actually be kind of fun. Like there was a place for you in it, a job to do, a story to be part of. You did not just watch it, you lived in it for a few minutes at a time. And honestly, that was enough. Dr. Mark Piper stood on the edge of something historic in Star Trek, the original series. He was the chief medical officer aboard the Enterprise in the show's second pilot episode, Where No Man Has Gone Before. Calm, logical, and seasoned, Piper gave viewers their first glimpse into how medicine might work in the final frontier. He patched up Captain Kirk, delivered crucial insight during a psychic breakdown, and handled danger without ever losing his cool. He was, by every indication, going to be an integral part of the crew. He was there before the uniforms changed, before the catchphrases were iconic, before the mission was fully defined. For many, he represents the lost blueprint of what the show could have been. But when the show officially launched, he was gone. No farewell, no transfer, no reason. He simply vanished, replaced by the fiery and emotionally charged Dr. Leonard McCoy. The show made no effort to explain the swap. Piper was never mentioned again. The baton was passed behind the scenes, not on screen. Some viewers assumed he had been reassigned. Others thought perhaps he had died, but nothing was confirmed. It was as if the second pilot had existed in a parallel universe, close enough to matter, but distant enough to be forgotten. Piper's disappearance is especially striking in a show known for continuity, mythology, and fan dedication. It is a reminder that even in the most detailed universes, some characters are casualties of early creative decisions. What does it say about legacy when the very first Doctor on the Enterprise is now just a footnote in a pilot most fans barely remember? Dana Plato was America's big sister. As Kimberly Drummond on Different Strokes, she brought heart, warmth, and grace to a sitcom that dared to tackle hard truths. She smiled through the screen like someone who had it all together, but the truth behind her eyes told a different story. Fame came quickly, too quickly, and it never taught her how to hold on to herself. After Different Strokes, the offers stopped. The industry moved on. Dana did not. She fought hard to stay relevant, to find herself in a world that had already moved past her. Her choices became more desperate. She posed for tabloids, took roles she would rather forget. And all the while, the girl who once made us laugh was slowly unraveling. Addiction wrapped around her like a shadow she could not shake. She tried to get clean, tried to come back. But the pressure of being famous and forgotten is its own kind of poison. By 34, Dana Plato was gone. A tragic overdose ended her life, and with it, a chapter of television history that still feels unfinished. She died just a day after telling a radio show she was finally turning things around. We like to believe child stars live charmed lives. Dana reminded us that charm can be a mask, that behind every laugh track there might be a cry for help we cannot hear. Her story is not just a cautionary tale, it is a heartbreak that never quite stopped echoing. If one of these stars meant something to you growing up, tell us who in the comments. Tap like if you felt the nostalgia and hit subscribe so you never miss a memory.